Hello, and welcome to Veronica's Voice, the podcast for cycle breakers and legacy makers, where we keep it real, raw, and authentic. Here with Sacred Sandy. So, Sandy is an organic consciousness coach devoted to the divine lost teachings of true masculine and feminine dynamics. We're going to be talking about what that means in some of our conversations. Divine lost teachings of masculine and feminine dynamics through polarity and understanding union templates. And I guarantee you that what you're going to hear from Sandy is different than you may have heard if you've been studying polarity teachings. Her medicine and service is as a Worldbridger, connecting the realms of spirit and earth to lead women into their most fulfilling lives possible, to live and love from a higher order. Welcome, Sacred Sandy.
Thank you, Veronika. It's an honor and a deep privilege to be here in this sacred space with you.
Yeah. Thank you. So, Sandy, today we're talking about the mystery of the resting feminine. So, can you just share the resting feminine? What does that mean to you?
It means so much. The feminine to me has always been the great mystery. And the feminine is creation itself. It's the creational force that brings life to so many things on this planet, in our physical reality, within ourselves. Even if I break it down, we are seeded with life, and then 9 months later, we produce a tiny human. And this concept of the great mystery of the feminine has always been something that fascinated me, even as a young girl, maybe, 7 or 8 years old. I had no conceptual experience through reading or learning or having any awareness around that. That came much, much later in my life, but I did always have this deep feeling, blood, in my bones, in my very being, that, to be a feminine creature is carrying this like mysterious privilege, this mysterious code, where we translate and we experience life in a very particular way. And as I moved through my life, as from a young child into, my teenage years, and then into my young adult, and now into my older adult years, I have just had the most beautiful unveiling, for lack of a better word, around my own lived experience with the mystery of the feminine. And the thing that struck me the most, and that has had such a profound impact upon my life, is this concept of being at rest. And to be at rest is not so much being still where there's no movement, no action. It's not a place of inaction. Being at rest as a feminine essence creature means that you are still taking in everything that's going on the outside, but there is also a lot going on the inside. And for women, I think these days, with the state of the world and all the things that are required of us, it's very easy to be at effect of everything outside of ourselves. So it's very rare that we get to rest and not feel bad about it, that we should be doing things or we should be doing more. So I experienced, probably in the last 3 years, maybe 4, I think, this very devotional space with myself to notice that my resting place is a native state that my feminine requires. And I'm a mum, I also have 2 different businesses that I kind of move in and out of. But when I started to honor my resting place, I started to touch a point of being able to create and being able to see and being able to translate and transmit a very different type of energy and movement, not only in everything that I was doing with my work or my parenting or my business or my home, but I found that when the feminine is in her resting place, that there is a very distinct stillness and quietness that allows you to really tap in and tune into your higher levels of consciousness, or there are different layers of consciousness that I was able to bring myself back into a restorative state, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah, that does make sense.
yeah, so for many women listening, I want them to just ask themselves or self-inquiry here, like being honest, like how often do you let yourself rest? And whatever that looks like, whether it's having a little nap or, um, sitting down and reading a book or going for a walk or sitting outside or anything that doesn't require you to do anything, but it requires all of you to just be in full presence with yourself, where you're just receiving. So if
Yeah.
you're outside, it's nature. If you're inside, it is receiving yourself, noticing how you're feeling. Within that space, I sometimes receive it like an echo, or a song that I hear underneath all the busyness. And when we can tune into that song or that rhythm, it is the thing that brings us back into a more grounded alignment with ourselves, so that we can see, hear, sense, and feel what it is that we're moving towards, what it is that we need to do more of or less of, or what it is that we need clarity around about what we're creating or what we're giving our attention and energy to. So the feminine at rest is something that I've honored deeply in myself, and I want to invite, the listeners here to honor when you get the call, like a song, to be in your feminine rest, because that's usually where some of your most potent and clear creations come from. So what's
Yeah.
your experience
Beautiful. Thank you,
been
Sandy.
with that?
Yeah, I'll share a little bit as well. Thank you for sharing that, Sandy. This is such an important topic. I probably say that about a lot of things, but um, you said something that I wanted to highlight. You said that when you're in that space of stillness and rest and quiet, that's when you're really able to hear what you need to do more of or less of, or maybe just what needs to be done at all. And I thought that was such an important thing to share, because I think in our culture, we have been taught that resting is like a waste of time. I mean, what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, not praise, but put on a pedestal people who don't need to sleep. Like, oh, I pulled an all-nighter, or oh, like, we reward that. We reward not resting.
Mm.
And I hear people, talk about feeling like it's a waste of time to just to be still, to do nothing, quote unquote, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Mm-hmm.
but what you said was so incredibly important, because when you're still, that's when you get and at least this is what I've experienced. And I think that's what I heard you say too, Sandy. What I've experienced is that when I'm really still, that's when I get very clear guidance on where to take action, how to take action. And my time is actually much more efficient when I've been,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. And I totally agree with you. I think, and this is just my personal observations and my own lived experience, but I, as a feminine essence creature, have noticed that our culture and our society um, kind of encourages and amplifies um, a lot of frantic, doingness. Like, for every woman's different, but some of us are mothers and business owners. Some of us have several businesses, or we have homes to maintain. Just those three areas, like whatever you do for a job, um, whatever kind of home that you live in, you either have children or you have pets, animals, or you may have a partner, or you may not have any of those, but you still have to look after your home and look after whatever you do for work. Manage your money, manage your health, and be in this constant state of reacting to all the things that require attention. And, it's not, you don't see many movies or books written about glorifying the woman at rest. If anything, it's kind of been poo-pooed a little bit. And somewhere in our conscious, perhaps our subconscious, we do get this very interesting um, dynamic going on where we may not even be able to sit still in rest because we will feel like we should be doing something.
Yes.
So what I've observed in myself and in my fellow sisterhood is the irony is we go and pay for rest. We'll go and pay for a meditation retreat or what are those retreats called where you go and you not speak for 10 days, a Vipassana. So we'll pay for it and get our rest and our quiet time. But we shy away from doing it organically,
It's
naturally.
like
And
it's like we need a reason, right? Like when we go to those
yeah,
things where it's like it's allowed, we have permission because we're going somewhere and we're doing something. We're
yeah,
doing a retreat. And so then we
yeah,
have
there,
permission
there
to
it
rest.
is. Yeah, and
Yeah.
there's that word doing. Like, the way that I found my resting place was not through choice. It was a little bit through burnout, I guess. For many reasons. I was serving lots of different things. I can't not feed my children. I can't not tend to my home. I can't not follow through on, the business commitments that I have agreed to. Um, but I found myself very, very tired energetically, spiritually, physically, mentally, that one day I just couldn't be bothered anymore to have this war going on with myself, where I was just like, um, you are being ineffective if you're resting. So it started off as me resting because I was so exhausted, but my mental realm would kick in. So even though air brackets I was resting, I noticed that my mind was already mapping out and creating all the things that I am going to do um, when I stop resting. So in theory, I wasn't really resting because I've come to understand the feminine fully in her rest, which is the place of her mystery. All those domains are still. So her mental realm is still. It doesn't mean it's not moving, it's just resting. But her heart realm is still, her sensation of her body is still, and her soul is also still. So there is like this very clean channel of rest that they all have to come into alignment to receive the rest. And that's where you are just something else starts to breathe through you, something else starts to animate through you. And that's that clarity and that's that knowingness that only I think feminines will probably relate to and feel more than perhaps our masculine counterparts. I think they would experience it differently, but it's so important because I know what being at burnout looks like and feels like, and I've seen it in many of my beautiful sisters. And it's a battle, and we are at war with ourselves to some degree, where we just are addicted to doing. And it's such a foreign concept to be in being. And we're human beings, we're feminine beings, and it's actually a natural state. And one of our highest divine feminine principles is to receive. It's a natural state. Your native feminine is meant to be able to have the sliding scale where she can move into rest. And only when she's in rest can she receive. But if she's not completely in her resting place, where all of those domains are still, open, and receiving whatever innate wisdom that's coming from the inside, not from the outside, she won't be able to receive the guidance and the direction or the insight to indicate where she is to move her attention and her energy. So
Yeah. Oh my goodness, Sandy, there's so much that you shared in there that I want to unpack. So I took some notes here to make sure we get back to it, because it was really full of so much stuff. And I want to make sure the lovely women listening really get into all the deepness of it. First, I want to share a thought about masculine and feminine energy, and I'm curious your perspective on this. This is my understanding, or my experience. So that the feminine, because you're talking about getting to burnout, and of course, and our listeners may know, if they've heard some of the other segments, I got to that space of burnout as well. And I think the way our world right now is set up is in the masculine energy in a lot of ways. But specific to what we're talking about today with the resting feminine is that masculine energy is more linear and productive and more constant and consistent, where you just sort of, have that energy. And I'll just share one example that was shared with me. This was a person's personal experience, so I can't say that this is across the board, but a beautiful acquaintance of mine who was transitioning from female to male and started taking testosterone, and they were taking it at that time at a very low dose, much lower than what they will eventually be at. And they shared that the first thing they noticed was higher energy in terms of like feeling productive and wanting to be moving and moving all the time. And so I think masculine energy is, in general, this is a broad generalization. This is not men. Of course, men fall along the spectrum. Masculine energy is linear and productive. Feminine energy is cyclical. And if you look at Mother Earth, if we think of the earth as feminine, and you go through the 4 seasons, spring is being very productive, summer is also productive but dying out, fall is resting, winter is deep rest and coming back out. And I've heard people talk about, not my area of expertise, I'm so curious if you have any thoughts on this, Sandy. I've heard some people talk about women's cycle. Literally, our menses, our bleeding cycle, matches spring, summer, fall, and winter. So within our, let's say, 28 days, we have periods of high productivity naturally in terms of our hormones, periods of productivity, periods of tiredness and rest, which is like the winter, and then sort of the periods in between. So every, period that you have, you're going through a spring, summer, fall, winter cycle. And if we try to, as women, as feminine essences, force ourselves into a linear, constantly being productive, we're missing our energy cycle. And that energy cycle is important because we gain different things from being in different parts of that cycle. And the rest is a part of that cycle. And it's native, what you said earlier, it's native to us as feminine beings. And it's important for all the reasons that you shared. I'm curious if you've kind of experienced like masculine, feminine energy, if you've observed that kind of dynamic of masculine and feminine energy.
Yeah, that's so interesting. There's so many interesting things you just said. I can only draw on my own unique experiences. One of them that I'm going to draw on to respond to that is there was a time in my life where I was deeply devoted to ceremony of the Native American Indian uh, vision quests. And it involved going out every year into nature, into the bush, which is a feminine expression. But ceremony has structure. So you're taught a set of, let's say, for lack of a better word, specific rituals that you do when you're out there by yourself. And you can be out there for a number of days or nights, and you're fasting, and you have no distractions. You're just you and Mother Nature with a set of very simple things that you do, which is prayer, which is awareness, and which has a degree of repetition, but there's a rhythm to it. So this circular way of living, I probably got the most insight into it during the decade that I spent practicing these ceremonies through Vision Quest. And the circle, it is a medicine wheel, so we have the circle there, but it was broken up into 4 segments, exactly like the 4 seasons. So one would go out and you would have a song that you would sing and chant whilst you were actually physically moving. You were doing a little shuffle dance backwards and forwards in the shape of a cross. So then so that's a mental thing. You're going to think about what you're doing. That physical action would tire you out. Then you would rest, emphasis on the word rest. You would stop the physical activity, and then you would move into your body because your body is feeling tired. So you're moving a cord around this circular way of expressing this ceremony, and you would notice all these sensations come up in your body. Then you would move around in a circle down to your heart. So then all your emotions would come up, and you would move through whatever emotions would come up. So you're at the 3rd quarter of this circle, and only when those 3 places were rested, that you'd surrendered to all of those, do you then move into spirit, which is the last quarter of this circular type of ceremony. And when you are moving into spirit, that is when you would have your insight, your innate wisdom. You would have, it's different for different people, but it's called Vision Quest because it's like you will have some sort of vision or experience that is not necessarily generated from you. It is an interaction and a receivership of something that's from the creator. But I did it for so many years that it became second nature to me to understand this circular way of living. I adopted it into everything that I did. So when I would get stuck from doing too much and it would be tired, so if I was like overworking myself and doing a lot of physical stuff in my job and I would be tired, I would have this image of the wheel and I would go, okay, I've got to rest because I'm physically tired. So I would then let my body feel the sensations like, oh, my shoulders hurt, or my back really hurts, or my feet hurt, and then I can tend to those. And then I would have some emotions come up. So I would be mindful not to get stuck in any of those places. As long as I kept moving through my circular way of living and feeling and experiencing with awareness, not trying to block things, I would have a much more easier day. I'd have a much more easier week. I'd have a much more easier 24-hour period of my sleep pattern, for example, of knowing what supplements I might need to get for myself, or I might need to take a bath, or I might need to say, no, I'm not going to do that client, or I'm not going to block out 5 days in a row of work. So the contrast of when I wasn't in circular living was very evident. Because I had no awareness, I had no concept, and I certainly had no map to overlay. So your question about, my experience of masculine and feminine in that cyclical nature is that my experience has been all the doing is the masculine and all the being is the feminine. So I need to make sure to the best of my ability that I honor both of those processes in me. And how do I do that? I just do that with my own awareness. I'm not fixed on my awareness that I have to be a certain way or it has to look a certain way, because then I'm too much in the masculine where I have an attachment to an expectation. It's got to only be 20 minutes of this, and then I can rest for 20 minutes here. Like, it's all actually quite blind, if I can allude to that. It is something that leads me from the inside out, and I trust it. And it's not something that shows itself through a structure where I can measure it in a linear way. There's definitely a place and there's a value in trying lots of different things. Like, I'm sure you and I have both learnt lots of different practices and modalities, both personally and with our clients. And I'm sure a lot of women listening have tried lots of different things. And there is value in that. But just, I want to kind of tether out, just create that space in between for the feminine creatures listening to just notice the space in between that contrast. So the masculine is doing whatever you're doing, the modality or the practice, that's great. But to be in your feminine and then to receive the benefits or the gift of whatever it is that you were doing requires that space in between. And that space sometimes can be uncomfortable because we're not used to sitting in space and quiet and stillness. Sometimes it will make you wriggle and squirm because you will have that sensation come up of like, oh, this is not working, or this is stupid, or all the things that we hit up against. But this is where I don't know what your practice is, or I kind of do, but this is where breath comes in. Like, I can pattern interrupt my mind when it's trying to like rob me of my resting space just by breathing. Like, I just let it say its little things, but I just use my breath to breathe life into the resting space. And I find that resting space, for me, maybe particularly in the last 18 months, I'd say, because we're now in 2023. And I'm not really living in linear time anymore. I don't know how else to explain it, but I'm in a much more responsive space as my feminine essence creature to just responding to that which is calling, leading, and guiding me from the inside out, which is from this resting space. So I still do masculine things, as in I have to figure out how to do stuff. It requires thought and then it requires action. But it feels so much better in my body when I go into the space in between that, which is like, okay, how does my feminine feel? What does my native part of myself see, sense, and feel inclined or coded or activated to move towards? Because sometimes we will be shown things, or we'll get a sense of things, or we'll get an idea or an inspiration drop in. But sometimes if I stay in my feminine enough, she will kind of go, yeah, no.
Yeah.
Whereas before, I would often just have a knee-jerk reaction and go, yeah, let's do that. Because I wasn't resting. And I think that resting place is that very deep wisdom that comes from all our ancestors, all our previous, the divine feminines that have walked this earth for eons. They knew this. They lived in a very circular way. they made time for prayer, for example. They made time for their devotional practices. They made time for nurturing the earth, nurturing their families, nurturing their children, but they also nurtured themselves. So, I'm noticing there's like that quadrant, those 4 quadrants that come in this circular way of living. Just with awareness, you may notice, for the women listening, that there is a rhythm to living in the feminine rest, and it will often show up in this rhythm of 4, where there's a time to create, there's a time to rest and receive. What is it that you're seeding? Like the seed of the idea or the inspiration come in. And then there's a time to kind of let it germinate and feed it. And then you come back to the time where, okay, now I know what I need to do, or what I need to, acquire. It might be I need to acquire more knowledge. I need to acquire more things, as in I need a good headset, or I need to get a book to write my things in, or I need a piece of software or an app. But I notice that things come in this rhythmic nature of 4.
Yeah. I so appreciated what you said about laying that circular, those 4 quadrants on top of, it could be your day. You said, you did it, you would sometimes notice it within 24 hours, or it could be over, Vision Quest, which is longer period of time, or your menstrual cycle, which is a month, and I really appreciated that, noticing that cycle in different lengths and periods. I was also laughing when you said, if we put structure onto our rest, like I'm going to rest for a certain amount of time, and then I'm going to go and do, and then I was laughing because that was me. I was like, okay, I'm tired, so I'm going to rest for this amount of time, and then back to it.
Yeah, I know. And we have to love ourselves and giggle at
we do. We have
ourselves.
to laugh.
When you catch yourself in that mental, you're not really resting. If you are like in your mind mapping out what you're going to do down to the second after you've rested, that's not true.
It's not rest.
It's not true rest. And, it's not to be hard on ourselves. It's just, I love that part about myself. And it doesn't happen that often, because I think loving it, because it was a part of me, and you don't know what you don't know till you know it, right? Like you can't see your own eyeball. Someone else can.
Yeah.
But it's through, you've been very intrinsic in reflecting things back to me, on our beautiful journey together. And sometimes it is our sisters or other, feminine essence creatures that can lead us and show us things that we may not be able to see ourselves when it comes to rest.
Well, and I want to acknowledge for people listening, because I think, so many, because I do think resting is so denigrated. Is that the right word? In our culture, right? And I just want to acknowledge how difficult this may be. Like if someone's listening and they're like, I can see that in myself that I don't rest, and oh my goodness, I should be resting, and all of a sudden it can bring up all kinds of things. It's difficult. And I'll just, I think, Sandy, and some of the listeners may know as well. I feel like my life has been pretty slow for a long period of a number of years now. I slow down to a pace that most people would find probably alarming. Like you were saying, time is no longer linear. Like I just respond to life. And nevertheless, as you know, I've slowed down even more. And I literally made a commitment to myself to lead with rest for 6 months, because of where my system was, right? And I am now beginning month 3 of that. January. Yeah. God, I can't
wow. Is it
already? Yeah, it's been 3 months already. Yeah. But what I'm finding now is like, I catch myself going, why am I resting so much? Or why am I, and by rest, and maybe meditating and maybe walking and maybe not necessarily like sleeping, but I am in that deep rest that you were talking about, Sandy.
Mm.
And I catch myself going, how much rest do you really need? Like, isn't it time to start doing? And then I'm like, wait a minute, you literally committed to yourself to 6 months and it's been 4 weeks or it's been whatever, And then I'm like, yeah, okay. So it's difficult. It's not in our culture, it's not in our conditioning, but it is in our nature, in our native feminine.
Mhm.
So Sandy, I'm curious, you talked a little bit ago now about getting still in your mind and in your heart and in your soul and just everywhere in your emotions so that you can really tap into that deeper knowing, into your native feminine. Can you share with our people listening, our women listening who are like, I don't know how to do that? Like, how do you get, what are some tips you can provide for someone who's just starting on this journey of resting? How can they get into that deep space of alignment where their whole being is resting?
Great question. The first thing is to practice noticing. So all of us here listening, each of you has a unique set of things that require your attention. But the practice of just noticing. Okay, so just notice all the moving parts in your life. And when you're noticing, it means that you're not actually judging them or you're not attached to them. To notice requires awareness, I guess. It's where you kind of can pull yourself either back or go above and just kind of look down upon or look at all the moving parts and without attachment into them. And it's through the act of noticing that you'll see which ones are bigger slices of the pie and which ones are smaller slices of the pie. But you're basically through noticing what you're doing is, again, it's like a circular thing. It's like if I could air draw a pie graph, a circle, and your life is broken up into these quadrants of pies. Pieces of the pie. So having a awareness of noticing, like, what are all the things that take up your energy and your attention and your time, and noticing which ones are really big and which ones are really small. So noticing means you have to disconnect from the doing and you need to stand in your being. So noticing is a really good thing to practice. And that does bring a little bit of peace. Sometimes it may not bring peace. It might have you have an awareness that you may not have had before, where you are like, oh, wow, I didn't notice or I haven't realized that like most of my time goes into these three big chunks of pie. And like, look at this tiny sliver, which is me time. Like, I thought I was giving myself more time, but actually I'm not. I mean, sometimes I've had my female clients actually draw it. Sometimes you need a more obvious visual. So notice.
I
Practice the
like
art of
that
noticing. Yeah.
drawing it. Yeah, that never occurred to me to do it that way.
Mm, mm.
I'm, as you know, I'm very much, or have been very much in my masculine. I love numbers and data and statistics. So I have a tendency to put things in spreadsheets, which I feel is
Yeah,
more
I know.
masculine. But I love
Yeah.
the concept of drawing your
Yeah.
pieces of pie. Where's all your time going?
Yeah. And so noticing is the first, for me, I'd probably say it's the foundation.
And
If you're going
without
to lay,
attachment, you said,
yeah,
without attachment, which is so important. Noticing without attachment.
yeah. So I'll speak a bit more to that because sometimes if you don't if you've never experienced what not having attachment is when you're noticing something, it may be difficult, or you may not even know that you're not noticing with attachment. So what does that mean is you'll know you're in attachment if you are feeling antsy about what you're noticing, or if you're feeling some kind of like irritation, if you're feeling a charge on it, basically. If you can practice noticing, so if there's any, wriggling, itchy, moving, like I'm feeling like a certain way about looking at this, then you're attached because you got an expectation. So move yourself back, give yourself permission to move back. So I'm very visual and I'm a big feeler. I translate through sense and feeling first. I'm a reflector in human design, so I can't help but process in this very strange way. And I do, data and logic and numbers probably in complete reverse. That's not my native state, but I can do it, reluctantly, but it's not my natural state of being. So if you need to, draw it. So if you're drawing it, you are looking at it. It's outside of you. So then you can have no attachment that way.
Oh,
So
I love
from
that.
from you practicing noticing, okay, that's going to create some space. Yeah. So this is all about the sacred space that the feminine has access to. The second thing,
And Sandy, real quick, I just wanted to
yeah,
highlight, I just noticed something. When you're talking about noticing will give you space, because in order to notice, you have already given yourself time to stop and notice.
correct.
So the noticing gives you space, even I'm using my hands, people can't see us, but gives
Me
you
too.
space after the noticing, right? Because once you start noticing something, space will open up. And also the act of noticing also gives you space because you've already set us, even if it's 30 seconds, even if you're like, I'm just going to stop for a moment and notice.
Yeah.
Now you've entered into a moment of stillness.
Yeah. And even the word noticing, like I'm a big wordy person, and I think all words have codes in them. I mean, they are. Each letter of the alphabet has a different
Sandy, I
frequency.
know all words have codes in them.
Well, me too, but for the women that, are listening to this, if they've never pondered that, even practicing you saying out loud, even if you're whispering it to yourself, this is another way to move yourself out of a doing state, is to quietly whisper. I mean, I whisper to myself like a mad woman if people heard me all the time. But I'll talk to myself sometimes where I might be reacting or responding to something external. It might be my kids, or it might be my chickens, in my backyard, or it might be, the person that I'm paying money to for my petrol. But if I get some sort of like ickiness in my experience with something external, which is usually to do with other people, I will notice. And sometimes I will say to myself, oh, I'm noticing that didn't feel good. What is that? Yeah. I don't even have to go into the what it exactly is, but the fact that I start saying to myself, I'm noticing that doesn't feel good. Um, I'm not actually deep diving into, oh, is that them projecting on me? Or is there a mirror? Like, what am I seeing about myself reflected
Yeah,
in
we
this
can
other
really
place?
get into our
Yeah,
heads about
you
that
can.
stuff.
Yeah, you don't need to do that. It's just the practice of noticing. So sometimes it's an energetic awareness that you do, but sometimes it can be a spoken thing as well. If you want to deepen into it, is like, say to yourself, I'm noticing that XYZ doesn't feel good, or this experience didn't feel good. And what you're actually doing is you're also creating space for you to feel the sensations in your body. Because often we're so busy doing stuff as women that we're not even noticing what on earth is going on in our body. And our body is the biggest amplifier, microphone, and translator of our feminine consciousness, that is the best possible tool to provide us our wisdom, to provide us our guidance, to provide us our agency that will either lead us towards walking in a better way, where we're living and loving and experiencing our life in a much more fulfilling, joyous, balanced, organic way, or it'll be doing the opposite. But if you're not even noticing, then you're just reacting, and you're not really separating any of that space. So that was a
Yes.
really long way of talking about
No, it's awesome.
noticing,
And,
but
and that reacting is when we lose touch with noticing with our bodies, with what's happening, and we betray our own selves because now we're doing things that's not in alignment with us, but we're not even noticing it because we're reacting.
yeah.
So yeah, noticing. Thank you for that. I could do a whole nother hour about listening to our bodies, but um, just speaking out loud, what you said about speaking out loud, and then when you do that, you can feel it in your body. You
Mm.
know, you can feel a response to the words. And you said you whisper, and I just want to share that I freaking just speak out loud like I'm talking to somebody. And I've gotten so in the habit of it, and I do it so often that recently, I think I shared this with you, Sandy, in one of our personal conversations, but recently I was in the grocery store and I just started talking out loud like to my car. And I was like leaning over, like looking in my cart. It looked like I was talking to the food in my cart. And I was like, what are we having for dinner tonight? I have chicken at home. And I just was just going on about whatever, the grocery shopping. But it was out loud. And I didn't even realize it at first. And then I stopped and I was like, oh, that was out loud. And there was a man standing behind me. And I turn around, he's just listening to me. And we just both start laughing. And I was like, yeah, I talk to myself. He was like, that's okay, we all do. So yeah, big fan of the talking out loud. I'm so glad that you shared that. And yeah, for if anyone listening feels uncomfortable, you can start with a whisper.
Mm.
But just yeah, speaking out loud is so powerful.
And it's always I always feel like it's like a little initiation or a rite of passage for the feminine to practice that, because as we kind of spoke earlier, our culture and our society has us so wired and geared to be so very well distracted with so much stuff that gets our attention. It's outside of ourselves. That it's almost like a privilege. And I like to reframe it. It is like a rite of passage that you get to claim back for yourself as a woman. And it's not a big thing. It's not like, oh, it requires a lot of my time or energy. The only thing that it requires is for you to just have an intention, and it's part of the feminine experiment, right? It's like, I don't know, for a long time, I didn't know how to notice. I just noticed what irritated me. I just noticed what I was always reacting to. I noticed when I was in some kind of way or state, about all the things that were going on in my life as I moved through life. But there is so much more peace on the other side for me. I can, and I'm not perfect. I still feel emotions. I get frustrated. I question, reality. I question my mothering skills. I question my capacity to really serve in the way that I want to serve women and the planet, and all the things that I have a deep desire, and I'm heavily coded in, that I feel very passionate about. And I'm kind of figuring out the how. I know my why, but the how is about, what do you notice about yourself? And one of the beautiful things about the art of noticing is that it does bring peace to the feminine. It does invite you into this resting place. And I promise all of you that it feels way better to practice giving yourself permission to be in your rest without a linear attachment to it. Um, you know, uh, Veronika, I'm sure I can share, like, we've been in our resting places since last year. And this is kind of how a lot of these conversations that we're talking about now have come about. Um, it was through our resting places that we began to tap in and tune into a very different part of our feminine um, consciousness that really wanted to lead and nourish us and guide us into the kind of things that we're doing now, and a lot of things that I think we're going to talk about as your beautiful dragon song starts to
Yeah, absolutely.
offer itself
Yeah, for
into the
people
world.
listening, yeah, Sandy and I started the feminine experiment together. Or we in conversation, we would meet regularly and talk about connecting with our feminine and leading with the feminine, which we're going to talk about. You're going to hear about in other segments. And we felt like we wanted to share our conversations with you all. So now you get to listen in as we talk about all these different things. So resting and getting into deep stillness. And you do that by practicing noticing without attachment. And also speaking out loud can help you notice drawing something, if drawing your time and what you're noticing. And through that, bringing peace to the feminine. Sandy, you shared that you've been living in this space of rest or this native feminine for the past 3 or 4 years. I'm curious, what changed? Like, how does your life look different now compared to prior?
I love the way you ask questions. So I appreciate you so much. Gosh, there's like so many things I could say. So I just learn best through contrast. Um, so I felt the contrast 4 years ago. So we're almost, let's say like 2020, and we all know, how the world changed kind of 2020-ish. Um, my world and my life before 2020 was deeply in service to serving people in a very structured way, in a very masculine, ceremonial way, in a very spiritual way. I was also kind of in a situationship and experimentation, let's say, of exploring whether something was good and healthy for me or not, with a masculine mortal. And I'm still a mum, but I was raising my kids. I was working a lot uh, in people's homes. So I was expending a lot, probably all of my energy, 100% of my energy externally, um, to my work, to a situationship, to my children, to keeping my home a sacred space, driving here and there, paying my bills. Everything was so wired to have me in doing all the time that I did not even have any awareness as to why I was kind of, I wasn't tired, I was wired. It was like I was on a high, always looking forward to the next thing that I was going to, be doing, and looking forward to making plans ahead of time, that I know that I was going to be doing X, Y, Z. And so, do you notice, for those listening, like there's a hell of a lot of doing in there and there's no space. You didn't hear me at any point say I was, carving out time for myself. I wasn't taking any baths. I didn't, go on any bushwalks. Like I was doing a lot of vision quests, I suppose, going out into the bush. But there's a lot of structure and service to hold space for other people in all that. And my work was very masculine orientated. It was at that for a long time, probably nearly 30 years of my life, was in women's homes, reorganizing their homes, but reorganizing their minds and their stuff and taking in all that. So when 2020 graced me with this invitation to stop, because that's what it did, it stopped my business dead in its tracks. So there was no more work. I had no choice but to be still. And I remember very poignantly the moment that I chose differently, and I got an opportunity to have a big meltdown and have a big suki lala and go, oh my God, my business is just destroyed and I have no income coming in, and what am I going to do, and how am I going to pay my rent, and how am I going to sustain, everything I need to do to be a good mum and pay the bills and feed my kids. Or I had an opportunity and I had enough finances in my savings to study something that I'd always wanted to study. And that was consciousness. I really had a deep desire, a secret desire, let's say. I was fascinated with masculine and feminine consciousness, and I always wanted to honor my nerd. My brain is quite nerdy, and I've always liked studying quantum mechanics and really complicated stuff that I don't even know how I get my head around that kind of stuff, but I just do. When it comes to quantum stuff, I always have. So basically, my old life got ripped away from me in a 24-hour period. And at the same time, a huge invitation dropped in to deep dive into learning, studying, and immersing myself in something that really lit me up. So I noticed which one felt good in my body and which one didn't. So I chose the one that felt good, and I didn't use my logic. If I'd listened to my logic, I would have talked myself out of it 10 times over about how reckless and irresponsible and what a risk that was. And it's going to take you this amount of time to get qualified. And like, I'm sure you can all relate to that. But it felt better to do something that brought something to life in me that felt good, that was nourishing my brain. Like I'm a thirst for knowledge about things that really light me up. So I didn't really hesitate. I did think about it maybe for a couple of minutes, but I just noticed my body was like a full yes. So I did. I signed up and I committed to learning, and I kind of surrendered, I guess. I'm in Australia. So at that time, there was a whole lot of different things going on, but basically we were in lockdown. You weren't allowed to go anywhere. So what better invitation for me to go, okay, I'm good with that. I've got my computer, my kids are safe, I can live simply. So I'm going to do something that makes me feel really good. And I'm going to talk about go down a rabbit hole willingly. I did, but it felt so good. And it brought something to life in me, which it gave life to a desire to learn. It gave life to moving and honoring the part of my innate wisdom and the part of my feminine that wanted to expand her awareness. So through learning, um, here's another noticing thing. We get opportunities to learn all sorts of programs and things. Just notice which ones really are a full body sensation, as in your body, your heart, and your mind, and your spirit. You've got to have all four of those saying yes, as opposed to just the mental, because I've also experienced where I've in the past just signed up to things that were a knee-jerk reaction. Yeah, I'm going to do that. And, I'll part with time and money, but because I was only in my mental realm, I didn't give myself the space to feel into the rest of the alignment. And what would often happen was a waste of my money because I didn't get out of it what I thought I wanted to. And I certainly came away with a few bits and bobs of information, but none of it actually fed my, I don't know, for lack of a better word, my dharma or my mission or that which drives me in a particular direction. So after 2020, the last 4 years, since choosing differently, because I noticed in my body what felt good, I saturated and immersed myself in only that which delighted all four of my domains, which was my mind was being nourished cleanly. I was also checking in and learning about my body, my sensations. I was learning about how to map out my consciousness. And being conscious about your consciousness is a really interesting topic, which, I'll offer, we can dive into and in another thing. But I became very conscious and I started to have this extreme expansion of my awareness around what felt right, what felt good, and what felt that what my spirit wanted me to do. And so the last 4 years have been like an adventure. It doesn't fit into conventional frames, or if somebody was to look at my life and go, you did what? And you did what for how long? And you spent what? And you did what? And you didn't do XYZ? Like, are you insane? They would probably, they would probably be right from their frame or their perspective. But
Like, I'm not insane. I'm just conscious.
yeah, it's like there was something awoke inside of me that gave me permission, or I gave myself permission to trust so deeply in noticing what made sense to me. And the more I started to become conscious and my consciousness started to expand, it was layer upon layer upon layer. It's not like the onion where it's you going in and there's another layer of the onion. It was quite the opposite. It was like, I don't know, I can't even think of something, but turn an onion inside out. It's like a circle and then another circle around that, another circle around that. Like it doesn't really stop for me. All I know is that I somehow made a different choice point, and it was gifted to me through the state of the world. Like everybody had their own experience with that, but
And Sandy,
I chose freedom.
you chose freedom. Yes. And Sandy, I'm totally noticing your languaging because you're saying I was gifted. And earlier you said I was invited. So you lost your business, or your business was taken away from you, I think is what you said. Also, you didn't say lost it. You said it was taken away
Yeah.
by the state of the world. And then you were invited into this other place. And I just want to point that out for people listening, because we were talking about language earlier and the power of the word, and so many people might be like, well, I was forced to go into another way of doing things, or I had the opportunity to, which is kind of similar, but I was invited. That just sounds so young.
Yeah,
I was
I know. I just got a
invited. Yeah.
body chill saying that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
wasn't even aware that that language came out,
Yeah,
but
it's so
that's
beautiful. And one of the things I wanted to highlight of what you just said was when we make decisions just from our mind, I can logic myself into and out of so many things. And Sandy, you've helped me with times when I was a yes in my alignment, and then my mind started talking myself out of this is insane. This is not what I'm supposed to do. And so, learning to, for people listening who maybe aren't practiced with knowing what that feels like, that full body yes, because sometimes our emotions can feel like a full body yes, because our emotions can be very strong and in our bodies. But you said it delighted all four of my domains. It delighted. That's such a beautiful word. All four of my domains. And I believe those four domains were your mind, your heart, your spiritual, and your soul. Is that
your
right?
body. So your body is the first domain, which is domain of sensation. Like there's a
Mhm.
difference between I'm feeling, yeah, because that's from your heart domain, but I'm noticing is the sensation of your
In the
body.
body. So it's your body,
Yeah,
your
the
mind, your
heart.
heart, and your spiritual,
Yeah, so the body, the heart, the mind, and then your spirit or your
and then your
soul.
spirit. Beautiful. Yeah. So delighted all. So for anyone listening, if it delights all four of your domains, your body, your heart, your mind, and your spirit, then you know it's in alignment.
Yeah.
Oh, I think we'll end there, Sacred Sandy. I had one more thing I wanted to touch on. I know we've been here a while. Oh no. Okay, really quick. You said earlier, the native feminine is meant to move into rest, and only then can she receive. And it is the native feminine's natural state to receive. And I know so many women, people, but women especially, struggle with receiving. And so I just wanted to highlight that statement that you made and ask if you have anything that you want to share about our natural state to receive.
Yeah, thank you for catching that. Yes, I didn't know myself for a long time that as a feminine essence creature, that I'm coded to receive. It's part of my natural code. It's to receive in all ways. It's to receive in my physical reality from its opposite. So any masculine expressions, and I'm not just talking masculine meaning men or males, I'm talking about masculine expressions as principles in the physical reality. Yes, it can be multiple men, but it's also money. It's also your mission, or that which you're driven or called to do, your medicine, your gifts. It's the way that I create. It's my manifestations. All of those things, I am coded. We all women are. We're coded to be in receivership of those things, because it's our native state. It comes naturally to us. So when the hose is blocked or kinked, we're not receiving. It doesn't feel good, because we're not in our natural native receivership of that, and that's why it doesn't feel good. But the native feminine, when she's rested, is receiving, is also part of our coding, and it's very ancient and it's very old. It's the sacred space that the feminine carries. And we live on a feminine planet, Mother Earth. And all females, all women that walk upon the earth, we are in direct connection to her. So as the planet is receiving, we also are receiving. So to remember our codes, that we walk in receivership of nature and creation itself. That's why I would think a lot of us enjoy being out in nature, because it feels natural, as opposed to being in the middle of the city. Some people might like that, but we're coded to receive. We're coded, therefore, to be in balance, which is rest. So there's a rhythm to rest. That's that sacred space. And that sacred space starts with noticing, and it becomes a rhythmic movement. It's kind of like a dance, where you dance between the scale of resting, receiving, and then moving into creating
Sandy,
that
isn't
which
it
is
interesting
received.
that if you look at our world, I think we, as especially mothers, we are women actually are conditioned to give and to not receive. If you
Oh my
look
God,
at like Mother's
yes.
Day advertisements, what are the messages around a mother? A mother is selfless. She is giving all the time. And while there's an element of truth to that, of course, we give to our families and to our children. That's part of our natural state of being as well. We are not intended to just be giving constantly, because it drains us. And yet that is what we are conditioned in our current culture to do as women. And if you look at, historically, the careers that women are expected to go into, they're all giving careers. And yes, again, there is some natural aspect to it, but I feel like we have been deconditioned from receiving. So
Absolutely.
so many women especially, are blocked from receiving. And so thank you for speaking to that, because it's so important to highlight and to remember that you're not selfish, you're not bad, or whatever other word might come up for you. It is actually in your natural state to receive. And when we receive as women, that's when we're able to create. And if we're
Yeah.
not receiving, we're not creating, which to me is part of the resting. Which is what you said, right? It's the
Yeah.
receiving. Yeah.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. There is this overgiving um tendency that we've fallen into, unintentionally, but I think it's probably been happening for hundreds of years. A lot of
Mhm.
our ancestors were probably experiencing that to a degree as well. But there's another space in resting, which is grace. If there's one thing that, the women listening leave this particular conversation with, is that there is a gift of the feminine that you have inside of you, which is a code, and it's the gift of receiving, yes, but it's like you also need to honor that you are giving back to yourself. And the giving back to yourself is giving yourself permission to rest. However that looks, for however long or short that looks, it's just a practice. Um, Veronika, I know you and I have often described our resting places and spaces as it's just become a moment by moment practice. It's a moment by moment awareness. And if that is all that you do, is you just practice moment by moment, having these awarenesses, practicing, noticing, you are creating a sacred space. It might only start as a small space within you, but once you activate that just with your noticing and your awareness, you've already started to feed it and it will start to grow. It has a life force of its own and it will grow. And this is part of the feminine coding as well.
It
So
does have a
bringing
life
it
force of
right
your
back around,
own. Yeah, be
yeah, to the
prepared.
mysterious feminine, the great
Yeah.
mystery, that is part of it. The codes that we carry are very mysterious and they're absolutely magical. And they're not always things that need to be labeled or identified to have all this structure and to be, linearly to stretch out in a linear way so it becomes conceptualized. It's actually the reverse. It's a sense, it's a sensation. This is why the body and the sensation of feeling that part of your alignment is important. But this is a really nice way to kind of tie up what we've talked about, is coming back to your grace, is knowing, having a deep knowing that you are the great mystery embodied in you, and that there is this secret, sacred space within you that is your resting space. And the more you can practice finding that and resting there, the more you will start to move towards living, loving, walking, talking, doing life in a much more um, deliberate, embodied way, as opposed to a autonomous, repetitive way.
And with ease, right, Sandy? That's what you and I have discovered
Yeah,
in our feminine experiment. When
yeah,
you
there's
do
this,
these things that Sandy's inviting you to do, this noticing and moving into that space of rest, it may feel scary. It felt scary for me because it's not what we're conditioned to do. And yet it actually allows you find that sacredness and it grows. And life has this ease and this rest and this flow that most people say they want and are unable to find. And I think you can find it within that resting space that you're referring to.
mm,
Oh, Sandy, beautiful. I can talk about this with you forever,
me
but we
too.
will wrap up for this segment, this conversation, so that our audience can digest everything we've shared here. If you're listening and you would like to connect more with Sacred Sandy, she is available to work in a one-on-one container with you. Or if you just want to hear, just get more of her amazingness, look in the podcast, the episode notes, and the link will be there where you can find beautiful Sacred Sandy and learn more about the mystery of the resting feminine. Sandy, it's been such an honor and privilege to talk with you today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Do you have any final words for our listeners?
I want to thank you, Veronika. Deep bow to this beautiful space. And I just want to honor and bless every single woman that's listening and every single woman that has yet to listen, and that I want you all to remember how sacred you all are, and that you are walking, a really beautiful, divine path home, and come back and rest.
Come back and rest.
Come back and rest.
Thank you for joining me on Veronika's Voice. If you took something away from today's episode, remember to like, share, and subscribe so others can benefit as well. See you next time.